Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to my review slash comparison of Blossom Tales: The Sleeping King for Nintendo Switch. So I've been meaning to do this for a little while now. So yeah, let's get right into it. So a few of you have expressed an interest in hearing a little more about my thoughts on Blossom Tales, because I've expressed that it's a game you can definitely enjoy and get into, though at the same time I'm saying that it's pretty underwhelming. So I want to go into greater detail as to what I mean and take a much closer look at this title. To do this, I'm going to compare Blossom Tales with Retro Zelda, specifically Link's Awakening. I understand that Blossom Tales was more heavily inspired by A Link to the Past, and resembles LTTP more than Link's Awakening. Though LA had a greater impact on me, I've played it way more than LTTP, and also played it last week, so I feel the comparison examples that I give will be a little more on the fresh side and really demonstrate where I'm coming from with all of this, because I know it more intimately than I do any other Zelda game. Okay, so the reason I'm doing a review slash comparison instead of focusing purely on Blossom Tales itself is because so many people are praising this game as a solid Zelda-like, and honestly I'm not in agreement with that. Not in the slightest. Like, I'm sharing this opinion not to hate on the game, but simply because I want the developers to not just hear everyone praising it and think that, oh great, everyone loves it, so let's make another mediocre title, but to have them actually be aware that there are some who just aren't impressed because they see major holes with the bulk of the project, like myself. And if these things aren't addressed, then I can honestly say that I likely won't purchase another RPG made by them. So it's as simple as that. Bear in mind, these are simply my opinions based on a single playthrough of the game. You guys are more than welcome to agree or disagree with me. Okay, so let's start off with the story. You play as a newly appointed knight who embarks on a quest to retrieve 3 items that are vital to awakening the king, who has been put to sleep by his evil brother slash wizard advisor Crocus. Sounds pretty straightforward. However, being straightforward is what kept the intrigue out of it for me. Right from the get-go, you know what is required and you just go out and do it. End of story. I didn't find this captivating at all, so in terms of the story's timeline, I found it to be very basic, lacking any sort of depth, extremely linear, no relevant or exciting tangents thrown into the mix. I didn't feel engaged by anything that happened in terms of the plot. I honestly didn't care about much of what was going on. There were no surprises for me, no unique or gripping developments. I didn't even care about the story. It felt like there was nothing intriguing enough to invest myself in, because it's just like, oh, go here, go there, do this, do that. Like, it's just very plain in that sense. Compare this to Link's Awakening, where sure, you have 8 instruments you're collecting to awaken the Windfish, and each of those are found in one of the original 8 dungeons. The huge difference to me is that in LA you have unique challenges or times where you stem off from the main story to do other things before coming back and continuing the progression. This is huge because it's the difference between a game like Blossom Tales, where I was feeling like you're just hearing where to go next and then doing that, and then LA, you have you're genuinely being plunged into a world you know next to nothing about. You have no idea what to do right away. You're not given more than a few scraps of information to work with, and you really are solving things on your own. And that builds a certain mentality that contributes to how you approach and use your character, as well as creates an exciting pace in which the story unfolds and you realize more and more. Another thing about the story that I wasn't too into is the fact that it's the grandfather telling the story to the kids. It's a neat idea, though. There are just, I don't want to complain about they're including that, but the thing is, the 2 main things I'll say about their execution of this is that first, it just seems constantly there, like the dialogue interruptions cropping up over things that you really don't care about, and secondly, it was barely integrated. There were only a few times that I recall where you were given the option of what kind of boss would appear, and that's great, though to introduce this whole storytelling idea spanning the entire game, and yet at the same time it just feels very weak and unused when they could have done so much more with that. So that's more or less what I have to say on the story. Let's head on over to characters. So ultimately forgettable. Let's talk about the main character, who I actually looked up the name of since I'd forgotten. I thought it was Rose, though that's the order of the knights she's a part of. So Lily, the whole time I was playing, I felt like my character was a 3-year-old girl. Part of this has to do with the fact that Lily, hearing her grandfather telling the story, is identical to the Lily you play as. And I get that this is intentional. I'd imagine the grandfather typically creates characters resembling his grandchildren to enamor them. Either that, or it's how the kids hearing the stories envision themselves as the main character or characters. Either way, I didn't find this charming or cute. It was a turn-off for me. She was also lacking any sort of growth or progression. That is a big one. She just felt static the whole time and didn't really go through any life-changing moments that are crucial to character development. So in that sense, I didn't care that she always wanted to be a knight from the moment she was like a kid. Like, I didn't feel she had much purpose in what she was doing. Like, where was the drive? Where were the reasons from her past as to why she'd want to be the one to set off on these journeys? It just didn't hold enough weight for me. Okay, so as for the villagers that you encounter along the way, villagers and whoever else that are strewn about the world, most of them are forgettable as well, and to be honest, there weren't really any significant interactions that really caught my attention or had me intrigued. I'd more or less talk to any given NPC, help them out one way or another, and then be on my way. There weren't really times where I thought about that character later on, or even cared about who they were or what they were doing. Progressing in the game didn't seem to hinge very much on speaking to specific people to gather useful information. Most of the time I found myself thinking about how I could easily have just not bothered talking to the bulk of the characters, and most of the time they didn't have too much to say that really interested me or had me wondering about their world. So all in all, not impressed with the characters. That being said, there is one major exception to this. One character I did really find fascinating is this one female she loses a ton of her personal journal entries. So during your travels and exploration of the world, you'll find these scrolls which you return to her. One thing that I always looked forward to was reading the scroll after finding it, because you'd get a little window into her own adventures and travels based on what she had written. And that was really interesting because you recognize that someone else is out there going through all of these unique situations as well, and that's the kind of foundation or development for a character that I want to see. You're learning about the world and an individual indirectly due to these external sources of information that you come across on your own time, traveling the lands, seeking out intentionally or sometimes stumbling upon them. And that is awesome. I get that not every character in the game is going to have this sort of thing going for them, though surely a greater balance could be achieved. Okay, now we are gonna, after I have a sip of water, we're gonna talk about the gameplay. Okay, so the controls are smooth. I have no issue with that. I don't have anything against how the controls function for me, or how they had the timing set up for things like the bow, sword swinging, etc. Like bombs, you name it. The transitions were smooth and crisp, so that's fantastic. Another cool feature, the stamina bar. That's a really nice feature. This is actually one of the few things I did find to be engaging, because you use stamina for bombs, arrows, magic, whatever. And I liked that I was not able to just go berserk with any of those things. The stamina system encouraged me to keep an eye on how much I was using and to be that much more careful about how and when I use those actions. Another cool thing, the log tab. I like that it shows a list of all the most recent dialogue and all of that, because that can essentially just be helpful when you have a lot on the go and you want a refresher. The thing is, though, I didn't feel the game required it because of how simple the linear everything felt. So it's a cool idea, but just not necessary in my opinion. The replay value for this game, there's a very little chance that I'll play Blossom Tales again because it's just not engaging to me at this point. Even going back to collect items you're missing after beating the game doesn't really hold any interest for me. I did a tiny bit afterwards, though it just felt empty and pointless, so I just stopped. Okay, so as for the map and the world itself, I'll admit that it was fun exploring a new world. I loved learning what kinds of areas there were, whether it be marshland, a snow-covered village up in the mountains, druidic forest areas, blue, green, whatever. the game had some really neat locations, so I was overly pleased with exploring those, and yeah, just being able to check out new places is exciting. That being said though, one major thing I noticed with the entire map is that it felt way too simple to traverse. There were maybe a select few times where you did something in order to access a new area, though it wasn't nearly often enough, and the result for me was that it felt like the bulk of the map could be accessed from very early in the game, simply by walking around and doing nothing special. So comparing this to Link's Awakening is just mind-boggling, because in there you have plenty of severe lockdown for the first while, and then after that, when you've progressed enough that you can roam around most places, even then you still have limitations based on how far in the story you've gone, what items you've acquired, and to me they did that so perfectly and everything was so well balanced. You earned every new area you gained access to. Like at the start, you have the beach, Mabe Village, and that's it. You're not going into the woods until you grab your sword, you're not going anywhere beyond Gaping Pits until you have Rock's Feather, and most other sections are blocked off until you get the Power Bracelet, so honestly it feels good when you see so many places early on that you can't get to, and then you discover that one item. You are just filled with this intrigue and excitement for going back and checking to see if you can get in with your newly found object. It's just so rewarding, you guys. Like, Blossom Tales did not provide that for me at all. Okay, so let's just keep going. We're going to touch on the bosses a little bit. Okay, so as for the bosses, I found the boss battles to be visually appealing and definitely kept me moving around for the most part due to their attack sequences. One major trend I noticed myself doing though is that I'd check out different ways to go on the offensive initially, and then moments later I'd just resort to using the bomb because it seemed the most efficient way to deal with them. And as far as I recall, the bombs worked on every single boss. So to me, that's just poor boss design. Once again, Link's Awakening is a prime example of solid boss design where you can't just use the same tactics over and over again because some are immune to certain things and require that super specific items that you just earned in the dungeon are used. Like, that is your ticket to beating the boss and finishing off the dungeon. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. As for the end boss in Blossom Tales, and this ties in with characters being forgettable, you go up against Crocus, the evil wizard advisor, though I don't even recall what he does, what form he takes, or anything about the final battle. That's saying a lot because I remember boss fights, and this just seemed to be such a breeze by for me that it's already out of mind. Like, there was nothing about it that gripped my attention enough to remember. So pretty underwhelming in that sense. Moving along to items and gold. I'm gonna bunch those together. Okay, so this is another huge one which I'm not impressed with. So let's talk about gold first and then touch on some specific items. From the very start, it's obvious that the game is only ever going to throw copious amounts of gold at you, which you will never really need. I thought it was great opening chests and seeing this huge pile of quid burst into view, though from what I remember, I made a single purchase in the entire game, and after that had gold just accumulating, and I never did anything else with it. This really left me wondering why they included currency in the first place. Like in Link's Awakening, if you're not going the route of stealing items outright from the shopkeeper, you very quickly learn how valuable every single rupee is that you find. I remember my first time ever playing LA, and I was so excited when I had enough to buy the shovel, so that I could just go crazy with digging and find even more rupees. Sure, there were playthroughs where I'd just steal the bow, though it didn't change the fact that the use of currency felt much more relevant and integrated in Link's Awakening. Like, if you buy the bow for that price tag of 980 rupees, which I'll say is almost the max amount you can obtain in the entire game, you earned it. Holy smokes, guys, you have no idea unless you've played that game and spent that hard-earned amount. Okay, so items, we're going to talk about a teleportation ring, which you get at the end of the game. Like, after you beat Crocus, you get it from, I think, the king or something like that. And yeah, it does exactly what it sounds like. It's a teleportation ring. It feels way too convenient for my liking, anyway. and also extremely underwhelming because you get it at the end of the game, like when everything's over pretty much. So you may or may not want to even be playing, or if you've collected enough, like you might just be done with the game. So yeah, the reason I feel it's too convenient though is because it literally lets you zip around anywhere you want to go, and there are two things I will say about that kind of easy access. One, you aren't required to memorize where the desired location is in relation to other places, which doesn't engage your mind while playing, and two, you miss out on the scenery so much more because you have so many places you can teleport to that it's actually less interactive for the player. You can even teleport to different places within the dungeons. To me, this is just way too easy. Link's Awakening, on the other hand, has only a handful of teleportation pits, which you come across as you explore the island more and more, and they are in unique spots, not just placed in typical areas. You might think that a main town like Mabe Village would have one, but nope. The teleporter is still a couple screens away, and I like that. There's another one up in the mountains, which you access during this really cool part mid-dungeon, when you step outside for some air before plunging back into the depths. It's creative inclusions like this which have me just loving the game more and more as the decades roll by, and I appreciate how spread out and few the teleporters are. You just get to know your surroundings and the island in general that much more. Okay, some other items, the talismans. You can obtain these talismans which grant you different spells like lightning, fire, etc. I found these to be overpowered in relation to how easily your character comes by them. I recall finding one in a cave or something, and it didn't require anything major in order to get it, and yet moments after, my character is laying waste to hordes of the undead with ease. And it just really brings the question to mind of how is my character suddenly wielding this with no effort? Like, next to nothing to obtain the item, and then suddenly a knight is the supreme magic user? I just don't get it, and it felt way too easy. Okay, there are two more items that I want to touch on briefly before we move on. The first are the quarter heart pieces, which seem to be everywhere you can possibly look. You find 4 and get an extra heart, like that's simple. Seems fine until you realize there are 48 in the game, and this just felt like major overkill to me because you don't need 12 extra hearts. Especially when you have the second item, which is this revival type flower. Its function is to just keep you in the game if you die, so if you end up getting killed and have this flower, you're good to go again. If you have multiple of these, then you really don't require paying attention to your life or playing consciously for that matter. I recall being in certain situations where I was intentionally playing without much thought because I knew I could afford to just soak up damage for a long while. And to me, items that grant those types of over-generous perks aren't promoting you to play wisely and have everything as tight as can be. Like, it means you can just play sloppy or just whatever, and there really isn't much penalty. Meanwhile, Link's Awakening has only 1/4 the amount of heart pieces Blossom Tales has, plus Link's Awakening has the secret medicine. You can obtain that like a single time until you use it, and then you're out and you have to get it again. So like they don't stack like the flowers do. So to me that's just way more balanced, and I like when things are balanced. Like, it just makes for a greater game overall. Okay, dungeons. Visually interesting, and some really creative ideas. Like, I like the rooms full of swinging maces, large snowballs being shot across, which you want to be dodging, and some other unique implementations like channeling electricity to power on an unlock mechanism, other stuff like igniting objects in a particular order to then burn down a barricade of roots blocking your way, that sort of thing. The downsides I noticed were repetitive uses of certain types of puzzles which weren't even challenging. Another thing were the layouts of the dungeons. They seemed pretty basic and didn't really require you to wrap your head around how to navigate them because they were essentially set in stone. Take a brief look at the dungeons in Link's Awakening, and every step of the way you're facing more and more challenges, sometimes in the form of new enemies, new puzzle-solving devices, races against time, different item combinations that are required, just a slew of things that keep the dungeons feeling worthy. and so well done every time you play through the game. I remember my first time ever exploring Eagle's Tower, and just the amount of mental puzzling required, it's still so fascinating to me. You actually use your brain, and afterwards you feel so accomplished. In Blossom Tales, I didn't feel accomplished or as though I had just conquered this epic series of puzzles and challenges. I literally skimmed through these parts and then it was over, and that was it. So my final thoughts, it really just boils down to the fact that I was super stoked to get the game. I had a lot of excitement for this, and to be honest, it was refreshing diving into a new retro-style RPG, though the vibrancy didn't last, and very quickly I found things to be way too easy, lacking any sort of genuine creativity, and ultimately not a game I will encourage anyone to play. I get that the developers were inspired by Zelda and weren't afraid to show it, though surely they could have remained true to their inspiration while putting forth a greater effort to be a little more on the creative side. Like, the fact that we have to charge up your sword and swing it around in a circle, or the beam you can shoot from it when at full health, says to me they weren't even trying. They could have easily added their own unique touch instead of reproducing so much of what has already been done. I think a lot of people are just infatuated with the fact that we have a new Zelda-like, and so they're convincing themselves that this game is a masterpiece, which is filling a void within, when in reality the game just falls short every step of the way and really doesn't leave a positive, exciting, or intriguing lasting impression for me. The exceptions are, the music is solid. There are some really well done songs that have me just staying in one area so I could listen to it longer. The look of the game is great as well. I love the colors and the retro style. The trees, for instance, are really awesome design that stirs the nostalgia for me big time. Some of the game mechanics are definitely things I enjoyed. Here and there I found aspects of Blossom Tales that were wonderful, though there were so many more things that I just was not interested in. All of this isn't to say that I can't just appreciate the game for what it is, but the reason I'm taking this angle is because, like, when you praise the game to no end and gloss over the myriad of shortcomings while saying it's a Link to the Past #2 or it's the version of LTTP you wish you had growing up, I just don't feel that sends a constructive message to the developers, because it doesn't necessarily encourage them to really buckle down or get their act together for a future project. Like, it's just, yeah, it's not constructive in my opinion. Anyway, I'm going to leave off there for now. I'm sure there are a lot of things that didn't come to mind, so if I missed something, then feel free to comment and share your own thoughts down below and I'll check them out. A big thanks to Anahrae, who is the one playing for me while I go over my notes here, because that's just how we decide to do it. And yeah, also a big thanks to everyone who stuck around to listen to this until the end, or however long you stuck around for. Anyway, thanks so much, you guys, and I will see you next time. Take care.